Sorry?
Kirsten.
Naima.
So I'm Stephen Utella, and so imagine for a moment that you're at a Walmart and you see someone in a mask steal a woman's purse. Now imagine if when the police came to investigate, they gave Walmart a fine for not protecting the woman's belongings instead of going after the criminal. This is Article 13, now 17 in a nutshell. It bypasses the concept of safe harbor, which I will get to in a moment, and forces companies like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter to pay fines for copyrighted material that individuals upload. In this presentation, I will be explaining why you should be against Article 13, now called Article 17. Alright, so before I start with that, you need to understand a little bit of US law and versus European law. So in the US, we have this concept known as fair use. What fair use does is allows individuals to use copyrighted material without permission of the original copyright holder for reasons like educational use, parody, criticism/review, commentary, or research. The concept was founded in 1976 and is a very flexible law. That's why we haven't seen much change to it. Another important concept is safe harbor. This is the concept that companies are not held liable for copyrighted material on their platform as long as they remove it as soon as possible. This came from the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMC for short. In part, this means if I upload something like Ariana Grande's entire song on YouTube, YouTube won't be held liable as long as they remove the video as soon as possible. So the European version of fair use is known as permitted use and came from the copyright in the Information Society Directive of 2001. This works similar to fair use in how you can use certain material for classroom use, quotation, private copying, or parodies, but it's more rigid and there's not as many exceptions. So this takes me to Article 13. So according to article13.org, a site that heavily supports Article 13, it requires them to get authorization from rights holders for protected content or to remove specific works based on information given to them by rights holders. If copyrighted material is found on sites like YouTube, YouTube will have to pay a fine and remove the content. They could take it to court, but legal fees, like in America, are both extremely expensive and likely aren't worth just keeping the video up. This whole site's responsible for copyrighted material and not the individual who actually uploaded it. Okay, so some of the flaws with this is that the law itself is not very, or the directive is not very specific. So this leaves a lot of room for interpretation, especially on the ends of the big companies like music companies who are known as the rights holders. It shifts responsibilities from individuals actually uploading the content to the companies themselves. And there's a lack of technology to implement this type of law. Especially for companies like YouTube, which back in 2015 had over 400 hours of uploaded content every minute. Currently, YouTube's current system for detecting copyright is known as Content ID. They've been refining it for 11 years, and it costs a lot of money, something that smaller companies aren't going to be able to afford. Who it affects? Well, this directly affects social media sites like YouTube, Reddit, Tumblr, Facebook, and Twitter, along with the many content creators that upload material to these sites. This means that this law would indirectly impact anyone who uses the internet. Because while the law itself only really impacts those who live in the EU, if European YouTube creators can't upload content, then you're not going to be able to watch their content. and will be limited to what you get to see if you're interested in like European politics, like their viewpoints on American politics and all of that. Okay, so there are a few possible outcomes. One of the best case scenarios is the directive gets declined at the European Council, which is on April 15th, 2019, which is also happens to be today. Or if, when it does get passed, because it did get passed today actually, the rights holders decide to give access to their products to sites like YouTube. So the argument to why you would want this would be it allows for creation of more content by having less videos be removed for copyright reasons. This came from the article13.org website I brought up earlier, and the only reason this is even remotely true is because there would be less content to be removed. Because Article 13 acts as a filter to remove copyrighted material. Another common argument is that it would allow for original content creators to be paid accordingly, but if you know anything about YouTube's current system, the creators or rights holders to that content could demonetize videos they find on the channel, like on YouTube, and instead have the money directed to them. Worst case scenario is many small channels and social media users would be removed, and a possible reduction in new channels from European Union countries. According to YouTube's CEO, Susan Wojcicki, I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Article 13, as written, threatens to shut down the ability of millions of people, from creators like you to everyday users, to upload content to platforms like YouTube. Also, another problem would be that YouTube does tend to use a one blanket covers all policy, so they usually just enforce the strictest laws and apply it evenly throughout, since that usually would cost us money. So the results of the European Council, 19 member states voted yes and 6 against, with 3 abstained. Back in March 26th, they had the European Parliament vote, and they adopted the directive with 348 yeses, 274 against, and 36 abstained. The good news is, it's still a directive, and it will take up to 2 years for the individual countries themselves to implement laws to adjust to this. And sites like YouTube are still unlikely to implement these laws worldwide, as each country has their own copyright laws. So Americans will probably never get stuck with this, but we will still be unable to see certain content from the EU. So what can you do? Well, as Americans, you don't really have a lot you can do other than spread the word and communicate with impacted companies to say, hey, don't adopt this as like an overall policy. In the words of Theodore Roosevelt, do what you can with what you have where you are. That's my citations, and that's my future sources. That's it.